Welcome to the SIP, the Solstice Innovations podcast. In each episode, we chat with industry experts and innovators in insurance and insurtech. Join us for insights on trends, technologies, and the stories driving our industry forward. Let's sip on knowledge together at the SIP. Hi, I'm John Umstead with Solstice Innovations. On this episode of the SIP, our guest is Katelyn DePasquale, who is the Vice President of Operations at DataVerify and DataVerify Flood Services. Okay, Katelyn, why don't we start by having you just introduce yourself, who you work for, a little bit about your career journey, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, hey, good morning, John. Happy to be here. Katelyn DePasquale. I am the VP of Operations. I work with DataVerify and DataVerify Flood Services. I got to be where I am. I actually started out, I have a previous life being in the education field. And so I started out with training and really learning, the back-end processes with our various products. And through that, I have grown to learn more about the operations side of the business, which I truly love, and kind of expanding that training approach, working more with not just our internal customers, but also with our external customers as well. So I like to have a little bit of that behind the scenes day to day, but I also like seeing how what we do behind the scenes directly impacts our customers.
That's great. Yeah, I started my own career actually in IT as a developer, but I also then moved into training kind of early in my career as well. And I think it's a great experience because it kind of it forces you to sort of see things from the operations side. Well, hey, in your present role, you kind of sit at this intersection of operations and data validation. So what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about the role of data accuracy in insurance and mortgage workflows?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that data accuracy is just, a one-time check-in or a one-time checkpoint. I think in reality, it's something that has to be maintained across the entire data lifecycle, and having regular check-ins, follow-ups are very important, because even if you just slightly get that data wrong a little bit at the beginning, that data error is just going to compound, and you're going to see it continue to compound downstream. Ultimately, it's going to impact decisions, compliance, and then our customer experience. So I think if I would maybe say that a little bit more succinct, it's not just having the accurate data, but it's having the accurate data consistently.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too. There's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, but it's not just garbage in, garbage out. It can be garbage in and then exponentially increased amount of garbage out, depending on what all that's touching or being touched by in the process.
It's only as good as the data that we're putting in, right? That end product or your end analysis, whatever it is that you're doing. I think that adage is very true.
So with DataVerify Flood Services, you focus on validating critical data points. Speaking of data, so where do you kind of most often see breakdowns in the data quality, kind of across the policy life cycle from submission to servicing, anywhere in between?
I can only speak from my experience, but I usually see breakdowns happen at handoffs, maybe perhaps various teams or various points in the process when the data is either being exchanged between those teams or between various systems. So I think it's really important to hit home on how important it is to have a robust QC process. Data can be incomplete or formatted in a way that doesn't necessarily map cleanly when it's received. And I'm going to steal what your line was there, John, but that creates garbage in, garbage out. The second is where the issue isn't necessarily accuracy at the start, but it's over the timeline of the data, right? So especially speaking to your question, tracking the ongoing changes, making sure that data updates occur on a timely basis, and ensuring nothing falls through the cracks. Because I think when you start to see those things happen, you have like data drift, so to speak. And that's where the risks come in.
That's a perfect lead into the next question. So, it's like with flood insurance, compliance is pretty important and can be pretty unforgiving. So, how does that strong data validation reduce the risk, not just for the carriers, but also for lenders and maybe even for the borrowers themselves, the policyholders?
So, helping catch those issues before they ever become, I think, customer facing is
Mm.
crucial. For lenders, an incorrect flood zone determination or a misrenewal can mean a compliance violation. It can mean that the loan can't necessarily be sold on the secondary market. So when you provide consistent, accurate data to your customer, I think it builds something real. And in my mind, that's building trust. You want it so that lenders can be able to move forward with confidence in the data that's being provided to them. You don't want your borrowers or want borrowers to be hit with unexpected changes. And then as you work through that, I think what it does is it builds a trust cycle. And it's not just talking about trust as like a feel good approach, but I think a literal approach, because that's ultimately what drives retention and keeps that relationship intact with your lenders. And they can move confidently through their compliance process as well.
Going back to something that you talked a little bit about earlier, from an operational perspective, so you were talking about handoffs of the data, and that's where some errors can occur. But oftentimes, operations team, wherever they might be in the process, they kind of inherit some problems that may have been created upstream. So, what are some of the common operational efficiencies that are caused by poor data, and how can companies fix them at the source?
I often see things like manual review or duplicated team efforts, and often the issues aren't necessarily coming in loud. I think they come in silently, and then when it's a loud problem, that's when they're noticed at times. So, for example, if property addresses get tied to an outdated FEMA map, um, operations teams can inherit several different issues then downstream because of that. So you may have wrong insurance requirements, missed mandatory purchase requirements, or even unnecessary policies that don't need to be placed on the property. So I think our operational team, and it's really crucial, we understand that we also play a role in some of those inefficiencies or issues, and they can stem from our work. So we work very diligently to avoid this. And if we understand, if the flood zone is wrong, the insurance requirement is wrong, and then ultimately escrow can be funded incorrectly. I think keeping in mind, and I hope I'm answering your question here, John, but I would say, data quality throughout the life cycle is something that we focus on heavily. Um, and again, it's constantly reminding ourselves of some of those points that I'm speaking to.
For sure, and taking that data quality question a little bit further, but now applying technology. So, technology changing rapidly every day, but we still get bad data
Mhm.
depending on where we are, right? So, what role does automation or do automation and AI play in improving that data integrity, and where do human controls still matter most?
That's a great question, John, and it's a hot question, right? When you
Yeah,
talk about AI,
yeah.
at any point these days, I think a lot of us talk about AI probably on a daily basis, especially if you are working in any world that has to do with data. So I think I want to be upfront that I acknowledge that AI is ever evolving, and I'm providing my opinion. I'm also happy to say that I'm actively learning, right? So I think I just want to say all of that before I answer any more of the question. But on a daily basis, just looking at how we can incorporate AI into back end processes, and exploring what opportunities are out there daily. I think what I do know, or what I have seen for certain, is that AI has been really great at scaling. So scaling and scaling consistently, handling large volumes, identifying problems quickly. I still want to keep in mind some of the things that I've highlighted already in this conversation, which is that I think it's imperative to have that strong QC process. I think that deserves being repeated. So we've probably heard this term, but human oversight or keeping humans in the loop, I think, is critical,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to matters where there are items that need to have a more deeper review. So I guess to like put some context to that, I am thinking about areas where judgment matters the most. So for example, complex property situations. It can sometimes require human review to look at like LOMAR and LOMAC interpretations, perhaps in areas where the data might get challenged more often, that we historically see that it requires that additional human oversight. Again, if we don't have the right determination, it can trigger the compliance issues we've talked about, regulatory violations. So I am seeing and I hope I'm not I hope I'm not going, muddying my words too much, but I see the benefits with AI and that scaling and in day-to-day processes. But I think it's really important to continue to see and acknowledge that there are processes where we need to continue to have human oversight or that human in the loop.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in the world that I come from with, system replacements and that sort of thing, and not just at Solstice, but in general, there are a couple of places where a conversion to a new system fails, and it's rarely the functionality of the software itself. It's usually the data that's being converted or transferred, or just the processes around it, that the organization's own ability to transform along with the new capabilities, or different capabilities that the new software brings. And so, when we talk about AI, we often think, we immediately go to what processes, on that end, on the user end, is it taking care of, and but there's a whole lot behind the scenes as well. So some of the places that AI can really come in handy or helpful is on that data validation. And to your point, you don't want to lose the human oversight and the human touch where it makes sense to do it. But there are a lot of tasky things that
Mm-hmm.
can go on, that can vastly improve that quality of that data prior to converting into a new system. So a lot can go on in the back end that we just don't tend to immediately think of. But certainly there has to, at least with today's technology, who knows? It's moving so fast. Who knows what it's going to look like in a year or 2 years, right? But presently,
I
yeah,
might even say next, in the next month, 2 months,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
right. But certainly, at least now, that human interaction is still very vital. So.
Hmm.
All right, so data touches all of the stakeholders, every stakeholder, agents, carriers, lenders, regulators, et cetera. So where do you see the biggest disconnect perhaps today between how data is created and validated and ultimately used?
So I think I often hear a lot about there's this urge to keep adding more data to the current data sets, as if more data or more volume equals better data. So I think just having the clarity across the full chain, understanding, like I'm saying, where it's coming from, who's creating it, and who is validating it, and making sure that we don't miss that piece. There are also some really great resources out there that allow us to help set shared standards for some of this data. So there's organizations and industry associations that can help us so that we don't have one stakeholder interpreting a field or a data point to mean one thing and another stakeholder to perhaps think that that field means something entirely different.
And speaking of associations, we didn't talk about this prior, but you have recently been elected to the board of directors for the National Flood Association. So I'd like to say congratulations for that. And the board is a better place for having you on it.
Thank you, John. I'm very excited to work on some of the important matters that the association deals with. And I'm really honored to work with the folks that are on that board and returning board members for
Yeah.
this 26, 27 year.
Yeah, it's a great organization because it looks out at so many different players that are concerned about flood in some capacity or another, and I mean it's virtually every type of focus, and that's what I love about it. You don't get that anywhere else.
Agreed.
All right. Well, hey, before we close out, I've got one more question for you. Actually, two. But the first one is, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything in particular that we haven't covered yet that you would like to, or anything that you would like to say about your company or the services that you provide?
We have covered a lot of ground. I think that you've asked me some really great questions, which I think I might be going back and re-asking some of them myself here uh, as I go into the next week of work and just some of my day-to-day processes with the operations team. I don't necessarily think there's anything that I would add that we didn't touch on, but just staying, I think, true to I think, especially speaking from a company standpoint, staying true to some of those important points that I mentioned, staying focused on data accountability and keeping in mind always how some of the decisions that we make impact not only the data downstream, but ultimately our customers. And those are things that we strive to keep in mind every day.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure if you just answered or at least partially answered the final question that I had for you,
No.
but uh, that is so. I'd like to kind of close each of these episodes with a little bit of wisdom from our guests. So, in your case, the question would be: so, what's one operational discipline, if you could name just one, um, or mindset that separates high performing organizations from everyone else when it comes to data and compliance?
So I think it is just one, John, but I'm going to use two words. I think
Okay.
commitment and investment. And maybe we'll just say investment is that discipline that I'm thinking of. So accountability is embedded across that commitment, and what we invest in grows. So it's important to keep in mind that there needs to be a deep understanding of the nuances. And regardless if we're talking about executive leadership or the day to day operations, that investment needs to be a constant focus. We live and operate in a world where data is what enables us to give our customers better business. And I think that's really what matters most to us. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we always want to be able to ask ourselves, how have we helped customers expand home ownership? And that really is a question that we come back to daily, and it's very important.
Yep. Without good data, you can't have good information, and you can't have processes that work properly. All right, Caitlin. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking time to be on our podcast. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think that wraps everything up.
Thank you for having me on, John. I really appreciate it. Thank you.